Now joining us is T.J. Carpenter here to talk about, the University of Missouri. And I do appreciate you joining the show, T.J. And I got a question for you because obviously all this stuff happened last year with the football team. And now evidently there's something going on. Excuse my ignorance. I haven't done my research, but I'm very curious to find out why in the hell is there so much racial tension there?
It's a good question. I think in some places there is a culture that can be broken, and I think that Missouri, that's obviously the case. Now, I've always said this about the protesters, Concerned Student 1950, because they're a very disorganized bunch. They get a lot of stuff wrong. They fabricate things. I think that a good point stated poorly is still a good point. So regardless of maybe the poor execution on their part in many cases, a lot of times, I think that what they have to say should be listened to. That being said, very few people in the Midwest want to hear that message. So I think that there are a lot of people who will do anything they can to discredit the movement, and it's easy to do because they, as I mentioned earlier, they're very disorganized. They don't really know they don't really know how to state what they want in a good manner. So I think that a lot of times they do themselves a disservice. But I think that it has a lot to do with history, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that there are a lot of people who just don't want to hear that people of minorities don't have the same advantages as people who are Caucasian, people who are white in this country. So I think that is the genesis of the tension, so to speak, amongst people at the University of Missouri Columbia.
Was there racial tension like this at the University of Missouri before Ferguson, or did this just happen recently, or what is the culture?
No, I think the Black Lives Matter movement sparked something, not just in Missouri, but I think at a lot of campuses across the country. I don't know what Missouri was like before the protests started. It didn't seem like there was any major issue, but I would say that over the last few years, as the PC culture has kind of taken its hold in a lot of places, not just in the Midwest, that the tensions, the willingness by some people to discuss these kinds of matters has increased. I know just from personal experience, my friends and I talk a lot more about it. I've had long conversations with my best friend, who's part Hispanic and part white. I mean, it's been a big issue for him, not just racial tensions, but feminism and how women are treated in this country. And so, I think more people are talking about it all the time, which is good. But I also think that a part of discourse is disagreement, and when disagreements escalate and people start to disagree with one another's viewpoints, I think obviously sometimes it can escalate, and I think that that's what we're seeing in a lot of places.
TJ, I know you started your career in Arkansas, and then you moved your way up to Kansas City. Can you explain the difference in philosophy or maybe mindset of both places that you've been?
I think that they are largely the same. Arkansas is a state that is part Midwest and part Southern, and the difference between that is basically Northwest Arkansas is essentially a Midwestern town, but there's obviously a lot of influence from the South because the rest of the state is very Southern. Where I'm from, there is not a large minority population, so I think outside of the university itself, which is it has a lot of it's very affluent. There are a lot of people from a lot of different places there because of the university. It brings in multicultural influences, but the rest of the state is very much old. It's sort of old in influence. So I think that the impact that the South and Southern culture has on most of the state is fairly well felt. there. But I would say that the people there are people in Fayetteville, Arkansas, are very much about Arkansas, and they're very much about Fayetteville and the culture of that place. And Kansas City is very much the same. If you're not from Kansas City, they let you know that you're an outsider. And I think that a lot of places are like that. Everybody is proud to be from where they're from. And so if you're not from there, then people will kind of give you that, they'll kind of give you that you're not from around here kind of line when you don't understand us. Well, when really I think everybody is basically the same, and so I like most people don't want to hear that, but that's kind of how all places are. But I think it's especially so in the Midwest because there is a little bit of that, the East Coast doesn't value us, the West Coast doesn't value us, so there is a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that complex there going on, that inferiority complex. Yeah.
Speaking about minority issues, about talking about Missouri's most famous seventh-round draft pick in the NFL, Michael Sam. What was the attitudes in Missouri when he came out, when he announced he was the first openly gay NFL player? Did the thoughts of him change in the community, or what's your take on that?
Well, everybody already knew in Columbia, so I think it was more the reaction of the world. People loved Michael Sam. He was a very accepted person, not just by the football team, by his teammates who had known for a long time, but by people in the community who also knew. So he was a guy who liked to go out and party a lot, and I think that there is this thinking that he didn't make it in the NFL because he was profiled as a gay man, as a gay African-American man in the NFL. And my personal belief on this is that while those things certainly exist in our society, I think that he's a guy who probably did not work as hard as he could have to stay in the league, and a lot of that has to do with just what you prioritize. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just simply what do you value, and I think that he valued enjoying time with his friends, going out and partying and having a good time, more so than somebody of his talent level could do and stay in the league. So I think that those limitations probably did him in a lot more than bias. But every situation is different. There's no question about that. And you got to find the right team. You got to find the right situation. So, but as far as how the community viewed him and still continues to view him, and I have not heard many. There's always some, but I would say the vast majority of people in Columbia, Missouri, and in Kansas City, where he's from, view Michael Sam with a very positive eye, and hope that he has success in whatever he does.
Bryden, did you have any questions?
I do. I have a couple. You seem to tiptoe around the whole Black Lives Matter thing. Well, not exactly endorsing it. I don't see how you can't say that they just come right out and just say, hey, none of these guys know what they're talking about. They're just protesting to protest. And instead throwing under the bus the whole Midwest, people don't want to listen to it. Couldn't it be just because the message really doesn't make too much sense? They're already privileged enough to be going to college.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, these Mizzou students, they're already going to a very good school. So why tiptoe around it? The message itself, it doesn't seem like it makes total sense to you. But aren't we all kind of just afraid to say it?
Afraid to say that
it doesn't make any sense.
That the protesters, what they're asking for is impractical. Yeah, I think that college is a place where you try to put ideas out there, and anytime you hear something like people need to acknowledge their white privilege. People need to acknowledge that they have certain inherent advantages in life that other people don't have. This is interesting because I think when people who are a part of the movement ask for those types of things, they don't understand that is a very accusatory thing. It's a very embarrassing thing to ask somebody else to acknowledge, because I think people who are white, they don't really understand why that's being asked. So I think that's where most of the tension between people who agree with Black Lives Matter and people who don't comes from. And I think just sitting down and sort of talking about it in a reasonable fashion is a much more effective way of getting your message across than yelling at people and asking people to do something that they feel is inherently embarrassing. And I feel like that's why a lot of times their message is drowned out or is ignored.
And just one last follow-up here. Isn't it kind of inherently racist to accuse white people of having all of this privilege when actually the SAT scores just to get into these colleges, as a black student, on average, you need around 864. As a white student, you need around 1068. Isn't this kind of, I hate the term reverse racism because racism is racism, but how can you explain to me how Black Lives Matter isn't a racist movement?
Well, I think that you can't really be racist. I think you can have bias, you can have prejudice. There's no question about that. But I don't know if you can really be racist when you are a member of the group that has been oppressed in this country for hundreds of years. So asking for equality, that's not uncalled for. And I think anything that causes discussion to be had is good. So I think that Black Lives Matter has done a lot of good things, but ultimately, I think that their execution of those things has been poor. So I think that that's really the biggest issue with the movement: their execution, not necessarily their message.
What is your opinion on the hashtag All Lives Matter movement going against the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, I think that we know that white lives matter, so that's not really a message that needs to be expressed. Yes, all lives matter, but you're not devaluing white lives to begin with. There's not really a point in saying all lives matter to try to just for inclusion's sake. Hispanic lives matter, Black lives matter, people who have been oppressed. I think that the specifics matter in this case. So to emphasize the people who have had problems in the future and still currently in this country, I think is important. So the All Lives Matter hashtag, or whatever you want to call it, is just simply a backlash movement to try to diminish the efforts of people who are trying to affect change. And I think that the genesis of it is not from a sincere place, but rather from a place of devil's advocacy. So I don't trust the source, therefore I don't think that the hashtag is effective.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. Last question, we'll get you out of here. And I'm going to kind of switch realms just because I'm curious to see what you think, because you brought up the PC movement from earlier. What is your opinion on it seems to be the anti-PC, the poster child of anti-PC, Donald Trump? What is your opinion?
On Donald Trump, he's a racist bigot who doesn't say things sincerely. So I'm not a big Donald Trump guy. I don't believe anything that he says. He's a narcissist who's trying to get elected. But you know what? Sometimes people gravitate towards a guy who thinks he's a king. So I think that's the genesis of his movement, that he's not PC, so to speak. He's not a guy who is willing to kowtow to the rules of the left. And so people will gravitate towards him for those reasons. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what he's saying is true or really sincere. He's still saying what people want to hear. He's just doing it in a way that is effective for people who really hate the PC movement. I think he's going to get slaughtered in the general election, so it's really a moot point in the end. But I would not say that Donald Trump is reflective of the vast majority of Americans' values.
Bryden, you're a Donald Trump supporter. Do you care to rebuttal to that?
Yeah, you don't, stay in your realm. You talk about the things you know what you're talking about. There's no way. If you look at the popular vote, you can't say he's not reflective of the views of the people. I disagree with you entirely in the general. I'll take another bet on that. I'll do $1,000. Do $1,000. He just takes the general.
Okay. That is maybe the easiest $1,000 I will ever make in my life.
Oh, he just slaved the hell out of Bryden. TJ Carpenter, we do appreciate you being on the show, sir. This was a great interview.
All right, thanks, guys. And, call me anytime. I love talking about complex issues, so I appreciate it.
Yes, and we appreciate you talking about these kind of issues. Once again, this was a great interview, so you're welcome on the show anytime, my man.
Thank you, TJ.
All right, thanks, guys.
It's time to get paid.
Leave it to Bryden, who's
that was
making
awesome.
$1,000 bets on our show. Tremendous. Andrew Powell Show.